thread hashtag. I got to make sure I record this. Shed the thread hashtag. All right. So what was that all about? Twice born? What was that referring to? Just because I'm not going to quiz you doesn't mean I can't. The rite of passage. Okay. What are you passing into? What is it kind of marking, separating? Yeah, so it's part of it is coming of age. It's not quite adulthood because if you remember the example, the kid was pretty young, but certainly not a baby anymore, right? Coming of a certain age where you're maybe a very young man, so moving toward adulthood. It is definitely part of the conversation. What else does it mark? It's a separation of that stage of a young man's life and the previous stage of his life, but it also separates him from other people, right? Who does it separate him from? Lower caste, yeah. So that's really what this thread comes to represent. I know we kind of led to this last time, but I want to make it very clear now. If I'm wearing this sacred thread, you can look at it and know that I'm a high caste person, right? It could be the Brahmins. Remember, I wrote this on the board. We had the Brahmins, the highest caste. We had the nobles, the Kshatriya, the warriors, blah, blah. We had the Vaishya, which are sort of the regular people. So those are the twice born, right? We could think of it as the high caste nobles, high caste priests, and then the sort of upper middle caste, which is a funny term to use, but I think it's kind of appropriate here. Those are the twice born people. They're the higher caste people. And you can't tell somebody's caste from looking at them. Wilkerson actually sort of makes a mistake about this in her book. But people criticized her for saying that and basically said, no, you can't tell somebody's caste from looking at them. You cannot tell from their skin color. What you can tell from is this thread, right? If you see the thread, then you know that they're a high caste person. Okay, so hopefully that's pretty clear. And now coming back to this question of the cost of caste, if you remember that story, the Brahmin guy called it a snake, right? You could feel its venom sinking into him, something like that. He said to take off your fake crown. And I asked you, what does this mean in American society? And we actually had a really good conversation. And so we can kind of come back to this. What is the cost of caste? And these are my ideas. I'd be welcome to hear your ideas too. But what are the sort of downsides to the caste system in America? And to me, and again, I'm open to you guys' thoughts too, if you have any, but to me, it's really this, it's isolation. We could call it fragmentation, lack of cooperation. There's a lot of Asian. So what do I mean by that? One thing that comes to mind is just, for example, community, right? So like I live in an apartment building. I hear very intimate things from my neighbors. Like I know upstairs there's a little kid who lives above me because I hear the little kids stomping around. I don't know if you guys can relate to this, if you live in apartments or what sort of buildings you live in. But my neighbor to the side, I know she plays the violin because I hear it all the time. As you can tell, it drives me nuts sometimes. So there are some very like intimate details I know about my neighbors. I don't know their names. I don't know the names of the people upstairs. I've even seen them around and like held the door open as they're going by, but I don't know their names. I don't know anything about them really, other than that they play the violin and they make a lot of noise when they're stomping around, right? And so I don't know about you guys. Maybe I can ask you, do you know your neighbors? Does anybody know your neighbors? And I'm not trying to say that nobody knows their neighbors in America, because people do, right? But it's also a little weird to not know your neighbors, isn't it? I mean, if you think about it, you live near each other, right? Imagine something weird, bad happens. You should be able to go to your neighbor's house to ask for help, ask for a cup of sugar, right? Have you ever heard this sort of idea before? There was, once upon a time, a sense of community. But do you guys know your neighbors? Does anybody know their neighbors? Maybe you're more friendly than I have been. Go introduce yourself or something. And there are some places in America, like the suburbs, where people kind of set up their little neighborhood communities, right? Maybe some of you are in the suburbs now. And those were formed kind of in the 50s in response to, let's just say, certain social developments in the 50s and 60s that pushed folks out into the suburbs, where they built new communities to be around each other. If you know the history of this, then maybe you know what I'm sort of getting at. But I think caste is actually behind a lot of these sorts of developments. Another issue is cooperation. And this one, I was trying to think of what's a good example of cooperation. Do you guys ever have to do group projects? Is your thing today a group project? Is it a group project? And what is your experience with a group project like? How's that been going this semester? Brendan is just laughing and not sure how to respond. Group projects this semester? I don't want to lead you guys into a certain answer. I'm actually kind of curious. How are they going? It's possible to do a good group project this semester, right? Does anybody have any stories? You guys are very quiet today. I'm giving you all these open-ended questions. They're okay. Sometimes all the work is on one person, though. Okay. Is that often you, Leo? Are you the one person? That's true. It should be they with an apostrophe. That's true. Yeah, I've heard similar complaints in sort of corporate life too, right? Where like 20% of the people do 80% of the work. For one of them, yes. Okay, so Leo has been the person doing all the work. Is this your experience too, Brendan? Do you do all the work in your group? He's left at the end trying to tie it all together. Yeah, that's kind of my experience too. And I don't mean to say cooperation never happens. It does happen, right? But a lot of the time it's sort of nervous. It's sort of haphazard, right? Because you got to get on the same page. You got to work together. But one thing I was thinking about, what we could do, we got staying up till 3 a.m. every couple of weeks for materials lab, where each project is 20 to 30 pages. That sounds like a nightmare, honestly. One thing it makes me think of, and maybe for something like this materials lab, this is actually sort of how it happens, but you guys all have your individual grades, and at least something that some people worry about is, let's say my individual grade gets affected by all my lazy classmates, right? And they bring me down. That seems unfair. And it is kind of unfair, right? And I remember being a student and kind of hating that sort of thing. But at the same time, I could grade all of you as a class, right? I could give you all the same grade, and that would really change the environment of the class, right? It doesn't have to be this individual kind of, almost somewhat competitive, somewhat aggressive environment where I'm just looking for me and everybody else I don't really care about. In some classes, the teacher might grade on a curve, and so there's a sense of, have you guys ever been in this class where if I do better and you do worse, then it's better for me because there's a curve, right? And so if my classmates do worse, then my grade will be perhaps even inflated even more. And so there is a version of education where it's the total opposite of cooperation, right? Where you're all sort of vying for the top spot. But then it sounds like, at least in some of your classes, for maybe the lab classes, you have to work together, right? And that's a very different sort of experience. And so in the end, it creates kind of a different environment, right? We interact with each other differently. We see each other differently. And I would argue in American society, we tend to cooperate less. I'm not saying it's gone, but I'm just saying it's sort of more in the background, and tend to focus on the individual more. Again, my individual grade, my individual GPA, which will get me my individual job, which will get me, into whatever lifestyle I want to be in, right? So these are all pretty related ideas. And I would argue at least part of this conversation comes back to what we've been talking about, right? Class, at the very least, right? Where if I get a better grade, I'll have a better job, I'll be a better class. If I get a worse grade, I'll have a worse job, I'll be a lower class. That really is how American society is structured, whether we like it or not, right? It doesn't have to be that way, but that's kind of how things go. So I would argue this is the cost, actually, is this sense of fragmentation, isolation, separation, individualization, right? Where we're each an individual competing with the other individuals of the world. I stress, it does not have to be that way, but it is that way, right? That's kind of how we function here. One last piece is Wilkerson's kind of solution, right? She says we should be nice to each other. She says empathy. Have you guys heard of empathy before? It's kind of a nice sentiment. I don't love this actually. I feel like she could do better, but it's not. I don't hate it either. It's just fine. It's pretty good. Who's heard of empathy? What is empathy? Empathy. I suppose we can look it up together. If you were in the room, I would torture you guys more, but it's too much torture. The ability to understand and share the feelings of another, right? We got Greek coming on here. There's a German equivalent. In feeling, it's 20th century. It's actually a relatively recent word. It's feeling something together with someone else, right? That's kind of a nice idea. Pathos, right? Sympathy, empathy, pathetic, right? That all has the same Greek root. And so Wilkerson says we need to recognize that we are need of one another more than we have been led to believe. And again, I'm part of this, right? I'm cracking the whip. I'm saying, get me your assignments in, get me your individual pieces in, right? So we are in the place, the school, where these sort of separations are created. And so what Wilkerson is saying is we need to recognize that we need each other more than we have been led to believe. So I take, partial responsibility for creating this environment of competition and separation. Perhaps I can be more creative in future semesters and give you more work group projects. One reason I don't love this is I feel like it's sort of pointing the finger at you, the reader. You know what I mean? And it's saying it's your fault. You need to be more empathetic. And if only you were more empathetic, then we live in a better place. And I feel like that's been crammed down our throats for years now. Probably your entire life, you've been told, be more empathetic, be more understanding. And people are kind of sick of it. Because frankly, people feel like it's not my fault. I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not hurting anybody, right? And I empathize with that. I understand that perspective. I think in some ways the empathy needs to come not from individuals, not only from individuals, let's say, but from the systems, right? From, let's say, corporations. Are corporations empathetic? Probably not. This is sort of Purser's argument, right? Is that there are systems of exploitation, and I hate to say this, but it's almost, again, like you have to be exploitative in order to make money in this world or something like that. And so the minute it comes down to the almighty dollar, right? It's like, well, of course we got to exploit people, right? It's what we have to do in order to make a living. And then we're all like, yeah, that's true. That's what we have to do to make a living. And again, it doesn't have to be that way. We don't have to exploit people in order to make money. We'll make more money if we exploit people. But I think this is the space we need some more empathy. And a lot of the time, this is bigger than the individual. Yeah, virtue signaling. Have you guys heard of that before? What is virtue signaling, Leo? He's probably typing right now, so I'll keep talking as he is. And so if we think about these stories we read, maybe we could see an example of virtue signaling in this radicalization of the dominant caste story. Remember at the restaurant, you had the stressed out restaurant worker who's trying to serve all the tables. And, is the server being totally racist? Maybe. It's a little blurry, right? Maybe he's just kind of busy. Was the plumber being racist? Maybe. Maybe he's just being sort of stressed out, sort of grumpy. And I think the power of this idea of caste is it lets us talk about this phenomenon where there's a slight difference. Okay, Leo respond, I'll read it in a second. Where there's a slight difference between, let's say me, I'm the white boy server, and there's a person of color sitting at the table. Maybe I don't want to be racist, but I'm just sort of naturally attracted to other people who look like me. And so I bring stuff to them first, right? We can make all sorts of explanations. We don't know, right? We don't know what's happening in their minds. And I think that's the power of this word caste, is it shows in a very subtle way, there are these lines that are drawn between people. And I think it's hard to deny them. So virtual signaling, the action or practice, is this a definition from a website? The action or practice of publicly expressing opinions or sentiments intended to demonstrate that one's good character, the moral correctness of one's position on a particular issue. Yeah, so in this story, we might see virtue signaling in Wilkerson's friend, right? She signaled her virtue Yeah, Google, right? See, I can tell when you guys Google. From the third word, when you put the action or practice, nobody talks that way. I bet if one of you wrote this, you probably put a slash, the action slash practice. That would look more like an actual student response. The friend kind of virtue signals here, right? The white woman, the higher caste friend, she says, "Hey, this is racism. This is outrageous." Again, does that mean she's insincere? No, I don't think so. But it doesn't mean she's virtue signaling. Probably, she probably was, right? So we live in a world where we value empathy to the point where, like Leo is saying, people almost kind of act it out without even know what they're doing. The Heart's Last Frontier was a nice story because we had this moment of caste where the separation is drawn between the plumber and Wilkerson, but they also can transcend that boundary, right? They overcame that boundary together by thinking about how they're both children of mothers who passed away. So that's really what she's talking about, right? Is being able to transcend this boundary between people. And I do think that's an important lesson. So I don't mean to dismiss it, but at the same time, I think we could also maybe be a bit more precise about who needs to be empathetic. You know, if our society took better care of us and didn't make us compete for the scraps all the time, then we'd probably see a hell of a lot more empathy between people too. Okay, any thoughts about this before we move on? This is just trying to kind of put a cap on yesterday's discussion. It was a good discussion. I remember by the end of it, we were really talking about interesting stuff. Going once, going twice. So, all right. So just a few more things coming from Hannah Arendt. So this is, again, Wilkerson. Here are three smart people that we can learn some things from about caste and kind of where it comes from. So I wrote at the top, how does caste persist? Hannah Arendt talks about the banality of evil. Has anybody heard of this word before? This is a good college word. This is one you can write down in your notes if you've never heard of this before. So banality is how you pronounce that. If you add a space, or it's really not a space, but if you get rid of the ity, it becomes banal. I know that looks like another word with a B at the front, but it is pronounced banal. And what does that mean? It just means boring. So what does it say? So lacking in originality as to be obvious and boring, right? So the boringness, right? Or if you want to sound more educated, the banality, the boringness of evil. What do you think she's talking about? The banality of evil. So if you don't know off the top of your head, you can think about when did she live? I'll give you a clue. Hannah Arendt, she was born in Germany, I'm pretty sure. It could be a neighboring country, but I'm pretty sure Germany. And she was Jewish, right? So that might be enough once you look at her dates and how old she was in the 1930s and 40s to decide what she's talking about. So what is she talking about? The banality of evil. What do you think? The boringness of evil. Maybe it's not an easy question. That's one reason I want to focus on this phrase. I think it's a very compelling phrase. What's she pointing at here? Just some dude. That's great. So if you couldn't hear, Brendan said, when you hear the word evil, you expect the devil with the red horns, and it's really like in your face and really obvious. But a lot of the time, evil is just some dude, right? You can't even tell that they are. Yeah, I think that's a good explanation. Other thoughts? Banality of evil? Anyone in the chat? Banality of evil. So maybe I'll just give you my thoughts. So a lot of the time when we think about Nazi Germany, which is of course what she lived through, we think, okay, life before that was pretty good, and then the Germans came, the Nazis came, they messed it all up because they're evil, and I think we can all agree Hitler was evil. People talk about him like he's the most evil person in history, right? Because he is evil. And then we beat them in the war, and now they're gone. And obviously, you know, in recent years, there's been a little bit of a resurgence, but for the most part, they're gone, right? And it was just this little blip on the map, and it's no big deal. But of course, what Hannah Arendt is saying is no, actually, that's wrong, right? What was happening before Hitler was a worldwide movement where people were, first of all, anti-Semitic, but even things like eugenics were very popular. Have you guys heard of eugenics before? That's a good thing to know about. I think it's beyond the reach of this class, because in the end, this is religious studies class, right? So she lived through World War One and Two, Great Depression, Vietnam War. Yeah, so Leo's really seeing the trends of the 20th century. She's probably tired of all the evil going on throughout her entire life. Yes, exactly. And World War II was the major moment. So she fled from Europe and came to America. And she's a famous philosopher. I don't know if I told you that, but she wrote books about her experiences and her thoughts on really this question of evil, right? It's an interesting question. It's why are people evil, and what makes them evil, and what's the nature of evil, and all that sort of stuff. So anyways, I brought up this thing about eugenics to just say it was not just the Nazis who discriminated against people, against Jewish people, but really people in general. Eugenics, well, why don't we can look it up here. I'll just put it, eugenics. And I think, yeah, so this is a long one. You can look it up yourself, but the study of how to arrange reproduction within a human population to increase the occurrence of heritable characteristics regarded as desirable. This is something we talked about, right? Heritability is one of the pillars of caste. And so a desirable heritable trait would be skin, but it's not only skin. Have you ever heard of highbrow or lowbrow humor? I guess usually people say lowbrow. Do you guys know what lowbrow means? If humor is lowbrow, what does that mean? It's kind of crass, right? Yeah, exactly. It's like unrefined. And so something that's highbrow would be more refined. This is talking about your eyebrow. If you imagine like a caveman or something, they have sort of a lower brow. It kind of sticks out, it's like it squishes their face a little bit. This comes from eugenics. This is one of the characteristics that people promoted, where the lower your eyebrows are, the less refined you are. The higher your eyebrows are, the longer your face is, the more refined you are. And this is all coming back from eugenics. It's not science, it's not real, it's not biologically established, but people tried. People tried. And so this idea of physical heritable characteristics was really all the rage all over the world 100 years ago. This was, the cutting edge of anthropology and arguably biology too. So anyways, this idea like the Nazis came out of nowhere and then went back to nowhere is a total lie, right? It was a part, they grew from the roots that were deep in the world at that time, in America, in Germany, all over the world. So anyways, this is all just to say, this did not come out of nowhere. There was a banality to the evil of the Nazis, right? It's easy to kind of almost scapegoat them, right? And say it was all them, it has nothing to do with us. But there is, a finger that points back at us when we talk about them. So obviously not us who are alive now, but we could say the Americans of that time. I don't think I need to read this, but yeah, caste system has a similar banality to it. Here's Ambedkar. So he's a leader of Dalit people in India. He says caste is a notion, it is a state of mind, right? And again, when we think about caste versus race, this is sort of what we were getting at, right? Is race is more sort of quote unquote biological, whereas in reality it's not. We often think about it as if it were. Caste, I think we can all agree, is sort of made up. It's a social concept. That's what Ambedkar is saying, but it still dominates people's lives, which is also important to recognize. So we could put race in here too. Race is a notion, it is a state of mind. We talked about before how there is a very minor biological difference between the so-called different races, but a major social difference, right? And so that also supports this idea that race is a state of mind, is a social creation that no one escapes, right? I think that's one power of this word caste, is it lets us see ourselves in it, right? I don't want to be a racist. I don't think I am racist, right? I'm very uncomfortable with the idea of me being racist. And yet I cannot deny that I am part of this caste system, at least as Wilkerson describes it. There's a long history of it. There are systems in place that perpetuate it. And I am part of these systems, right? Whether I want to be or not. And so it allows us to have this conversation where caste is in our minds. It is in our minds, right? All of us, everybody is implicated. No one escapes it. No one escapes exposure to its message that one set of people is presumed to be inherently smarter, more capable, more deserving than other groups deemed lower, right? It's drawing a line between people, saying one group is better, one group is worse. Finally, how to move forward. Albert Einstein, he's a smart guy. Here's a nice quote from him. We must make every effort to ensure that past injustice, violence, and economic discrimination will be made known to the people. The taboo, the let's, quote unquote, let's not talk about it, must be broken. You guys know about taboos? What is a taboo? I think that comes from like a Pacific Island language. I don't think it's a European term. Let's see, does it say? Yeah, it's Tongan. That's right. Yeah, Captain Cook. Very interesting. So anyways, it's something that's forbidden, right? It's like a custom or a cultural idea that's forbidden. So this idea like race is taboo and we can't talk about it. Einstein saying this is the problem. And I think it's late enough that we should not watch this video, but that's fine. Have you guys heard of the apartheid before? What is apartheid talking about? South Africa? Yeah. So very recently, right, until the early 90s, there were major laws in place, a lot like the American Jim Crow laws, separating people based on race. And it was very recently that they came to an end. And following when they came to an end, figures like Desmond Tutu, have you guys heard of Desmond Tutu before? He's kind of a nice Christian leader in South Africa, Desmond Tutu. Cleric, I guess that's his title. He's 89 years young. Look at him, going strong. So anyways, he was a major force behind this Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where people who committed atrocities, really horrible crimes, were faced with their victims, right? And they were able to reconcile, right? Reconciliation, reconcile the truth of what happened. And we really never had that in America, right? I think that's why we have this kind of uncomfortable sense of what it even is our history. Where do we come from, right? We can kind of leap all the way back to the founding fathers and be like, they were really pretty cool guys. And then, you know, the Civil War, but we can ignore that part. And now it's the modern time, right? So I think we have an uncomfortable relationship with our own past here in America, this taboo of not talking about it, not talking about race and what really happened here. But it still affects us today, right? By sweeping it under the rug, kind of festers under there. So that is it on caste. Any last thoughts about this? Like I said, there will be implications for this book. And in fact, actually, I have a question on the next slide that we can talk about too. If you thought this was interesting, you can write about it. That's why we would return to it in this part of the class. I wanted to remind you what this book's all about. And also, we read the last part of it too. So if you think that's interesting, you can write a paper about it. You can look for caste in this new book that we are reading, Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down. As you can see, it's from 1997. So that's a pretty long time ago, probably before a lot of you were born. It also deals with caste, though, but just in a context of medicine. So we talked about cultural caste versus more kind of quote unquote biological race. And we can think about, how does caste appear in medicine? Do you guys have any thoughts on this? Does caste show up in medicine, or is medicine like a caste-free zone? Now we're entering new topics that are not described by Wilkerson. Well, actually, that's not true. She does talk about some caste implications for medicine. Are you guys uncomfortable with this idea? Don't want to talk about it? Or is it just rainy and you're all sleepy and don't want to talk for that reason? For some reason, though, we're not talking. Well, it's okay. You don't have to talk. Maybe I'll push you harder on the next one. I'll just give you my thoughts. So caste in medicine, I think one thing we can definitely agree on is class in medicine. Do we agree on that? This is a major political issue, right? Is that some Americans have better access to healthcare than others because they can pay for it, right? Just like so many other things, right? Some Americans have better access to nice cars than others, right? That's sort of how our society works. And some people have more things than other people. But when it comes to medicine, it's heartbreaking, right? Because if you got to pay like $1,000 for insulin or something like that to just be alive, right? There's something wrong with that. And so I think we are in a difficult place when it comes to medicine in America. And the coronavirus highlighted that in a way that maybe none of us could have predicted. So that's class. Caste also shows up in more subtle ways. I'm not going to try to say doctors are racist. Again, you potentially could make that argument. Some people do make that argument. It's a lot like the waiter, though, right? That just like the waiter, they're not necessarily thinking, I'm going to be racist right now and discriminate against people. Some doctors treat people who look different from them differently than they treat people who do look the same as them, right? They're not trying to be bad. They're not trying to be evil. There's sort of a banality to it, right? But at the same time, I think there are these subtle differences in the way that they might treat people that have very real repercussions, actually. And if you go way back, there are things like the Tuskegee syphilis experiments. Have you guys heard of this before? Pretty nasty stuff, right? Where people were given STDs, they're given syphilis, and then were basically just observed, and it was white people doing it to black people in the South. You can look it up. It's really pretty nasty stuff. So certainly in history, and arguably even in the present, there are similar kinds of things happening. All right, why don't I push you more on this one? Religion and medicine. So we've got medical healing. I think we all know what that is. What would religious healing be? What is religious healing? Is that a term that makes sense to you? Have to think about it.
Reconfortation.
One more time.
I said reconfortation.
Confrontation?
Well, I said reconfortation. I don't know if kind of giving you some kind of recomfort.
Oh, comfort. Okay. Yeah, so like comforting someone. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. I like that idea. Do you have any examples, Drissa? How do religious people comfort people when they're sick?
Well, like when they come and pray for you, and they tell you that God will do something about it. Or let's say like somebody is doing something very wrong to you, they will tell you, well, just take it easy. You're gonna be like, God will give you a recompense for that, for not replicating.
Nice. Yeah, so like turning the other cheek or something like this. Yeah. So sometimes Drissa took it in an interesting direction, right? If somebody's in a difficult situation, even if somebody is exploiting them, right? Religious figures, religious teachings will say, you know, God will kind of set it straight. There'll be justice in the afterlife. And, you know, maybe I can add, there's also a sense if you are suffering now, right? If I have some horrible disease and I can't make sense of it, then people might say prayers and pray to God to cure the disease, or say that God has a plan, right? That this is all part of God's plan. And maybe we don't understand God's plan, but we can use religious ideas and religious scriptures to make sense of it and comfort ourselves. Eric says some religions do not believe in modern medicine. Yeah, do you have specifics on that, Eric? Or what comes to mind when you're saying that? I've heard of these things too. Is there a particular group you know of? Yeah. Christian Science. Have you guys heard of Christian Science? Jehovah's Witness? Yeah. I know more about Christian Science than Jehovah's Witness. So maybe I can't speak on the second one, but Christian Science is actually very famous, right? It's an American Christian tradition, let's call it. And why would they not believe in modern medicine? What do they do instead? They can do certain things in medicine. Yeah. It's not to say they don't believe in medicine at all, right? They just don't want you to get vaccines or get kind of surgeries or that sort of stuff. What should you do instead of doing those things? Pray. Yeah, very simply put, is use religion to heal yourself instead. Yeah, exactly. Eric's got it too. And so I've actually taught on this before. I used earlier versions of this class. We did segments on Christian Science, and it's pretty interesting. There's a sense that disease is a mistake, right? Because God, this comes back to Driss's point. If God is all good, God would never make us sick. If we are sick, it is our own misunderstanding of reality that is what makes us sick. It's a very interesting idea. And the only way to get better, or the best way to get better, is to just understand how things really exist, right? Which, of course, could be a type of prayer. It's praying to be able to see properly, reading the scriptures. And this is a movement still in America today. It's not as popular as maybe it once was. About 100 years ago, it was very popular. But now, maybe a few 100,000 people are Christian Scientists. So yeah, they're a major, a voice, let's say. There's a newspaper, the Christian Science Monitor, right? That's published by Christian Scientists. And again, is to kind of give them a voice in the religious marketplace. Very good. Okay, that's probably good enough. So what's the difference between medical and religious healing? What would you say? I guess we have a good example of religious healing now. What would you say is the difference between what we say medicine as we usually understand it and this religious stuff? How do you make that comparison? Hope, law. Medicine is based off science, the other is based off hope. Yeah, that makes sense to me. So there's biology, right? Biologically informed medical practices that treat, I don't know, we get our vaccine and it fills us up with antibodies, and those antibodies are proven through experimentation and various studies, and you can go to those studies that are scientific and try to prove those. Yeah, and things like prayer, even though people try to do scientific studies on prayer, very rarely do they prove very much. I'm not even here to say that there's no efficacy to it. I think there is some efficacy to it. All I am saying is that science is not always the best friend of religious healing, right? They're often kind of in conflict with each other. So that's a good way to think about it. One is more scientific than the other. So all of this comes together in this book. I think actually it's in the subtitle, right? We've got among child, and you might not know what among child means, but we'll talk about Hmong in a little while. Her American doctors and the collision of two cultures. And so what are the two cultures? It's basically what we're talking about here. Medicine based on science, religion based on the holy word. Yeah, exactly. So there's holy religious teachings, ideas, scriptures. And so this idea of a collision between two cultures, right? Collision. What are colliding is exactly what we're describing here. So that's what this book really brings us to. When did I say we were going to pause? At 35. So that means we have about 10 minutes. That's good. So let's talk about who are the Hmong. They're from Southeast Asia. And, I don't want to scare you, but let's do a map quiz. Hey. So this won't count for anything. It'll be more like a game. But let's do it. So again, the main character of this book, the family, the Lee family, they are from this country. It'll be a hint, number 5. That is the country that they're from. And so in order to kind of get a sense of who they are and where they're coming from, let's do a map quiz. So again, this is Southeast Asia. Number 1 and 2, and arguably number 4 are East Asia. So I don't want to mislead anybody, but you can maybe figure out what they are. And then here is South Asia over here. This is Southeast Asia. So take a few minutes, take out a piece of paper, or just write on your phone or whatever, write on some sort of notepad, something, 1 through 13, and try to identify these countries, okay? And, again, this is just for fun. I'm not going to record a score or anything. So, don't Google. See what you know. And then we'll go over it together, right? So take just a few minutes. I'll do it too. I'm cheating a little bit because I've done this before. But the first time I did it, actually, I got some of them wrong. So it's pretty hard. All right, maybe take another minute. Again, I'm not grading this, so you don't have to actually answer all of them if you don't know them all. Okay, ready? What is number 1?
China.
China. China. Yeah. So that it's a little hard to tell because you only see the bottom half, but you guys got it. Number 1, China. Number 2?
Hong Kong.
Hong Kong is close. So Hong Kong is actually around here somewhere, one of these. And Hong Kong is not its own country. It's part of China now. It used to be a British colony, now part of China. Number 2? Who's got number 2?
You said 2? Taiwan.
Taiwan. That's right, Taiwan. So it's a little bit of a trick question because, for example, number 1 does not recognize number 2 as being a country. But we can just call it a country. It has its own government. So number 2 is Taiwan. Very good. So also part of East Asia. Number 3.
Japan.
No, Japan's way up here. East Asia. So what is number 3? It's a different set of islands. The Philippines. Yeah. So that was an American colony for a while and still has American naval bases and stuff, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, number 3, Philippines, important place for American presence in Southeast Asia. Number 4 also has an important history with America. What is number 4?
Vietnam.
Vietnam. Yeah, exactly. And so that actually, we'll come back to that, but Vietnam's an important player in the book we're reading. Number 5. This one's harder. Thanos, yeah, Laos, exactly. And so, like I said, this is the home of the Lee family. If you read the first sentence of the book, I believe it says it. It says, if Leah Lee had been born in the highlands of northwest Laos, where her parents and 12 of her brothers and sisters were born, her mother would have squatted on the floor of the house that her father had built from an axe-hewn planks thatched with bamboo and grass. Is that not good writing or what? It's amazing. It's amazing. I listened to an interview where the author was like, I like the beginning with the word if. I was like, oh, you're thinking about the first word of your book? Amazing. Very maximized product. So yeah, Laos. This is an important place to remember. I mean, they're all important places to remember, but for our book, this is an important place. Number 6. What is number 6?
India.
India is actually on the border with number 6. I had to verify this. Like I said, this is hard. So this gray part, this is India. This is Bangladesh next to India. This is Myanmar. Yes, very good. So Myanmar. And maybe it is worth saying that there's another name for this country when the British controlled it as a colony. What is the colony called?
Birman.
Yeah, Burma. Exactly. So it's actually the language of Myanmar is Burmese, right? But I think the name that we should all use now, that the government itself uses, is Myanmar. Very good. Number 7. This is the one, oh yeah, Del got it. Thailand. This is the one country that was not colonized by European powers. Of all of these, I guess China too, but China's not really Southeast Asia. And certain parts of China were colonized by European powers. So yeah, Thailand, very good. Number 8. Cambodia. Yes, that is correct. So Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, this whole area was a French colonial space. Like I said, this was British up here. Number 9 is difficult. What is number 9? This is one I actually missed when I first did this. Tandos, it's Brunei. So this whole island is called Borneo. Yeah, it's a very small country, the northern part of Borneo. And there are 3 different countries on Borneo, right? So what is the orange color country that's also on this peninsula here? It is Malaysia. Malaysia. And so one way I think about Malaysia is that number 11 used to be a part of Malaysia and now is a separate country also because of the British. So what is number 11? Singapore. Yeah, so have you ever seen Crazy Rich Asians? Singapore, yeah, Tan says it's a great place. It is a great place. It's a very tiny little country, as you can see. Used to be a part of Malaysia. Then the British came and were like, hey, we want to colonize this. And eventually they got their way, as they did during those years so long ago. And so, yeah, the relationship between Singapore and Malaysia is kind of an interesting one. As maybe you know, a lot of Chinese people are there, right? And so there's a lot of sailing between southern China and Singapore. I think the winds change like halfway through the year. So a lot of sailing between the South China Sea. And then these are the Straits of Malacca. So there's an important corridor for shipping because, as you can tell, to get from East Asia to South Asia, you have to go through here. And then number 12, big group of islands, Indonesia, yes. And so maybe you've heard of the island of Bali. A lot of people go on vacation to Bali. That's a part of Indonesia. I believe, I should look this up before anybody quotes me, but I'm pretty sure this is the largest population of Muslims in any country in the world. So more than Pakistan, more than any other country, Indonesia has the largest population of Muslims. And so you don't always think Muslim countries, oh yeah, Indonesia, but it is. And finally, this one, 13, very difficult.
Papua.
Papua New Guinea? No, I believe New Guinea. Where is New Guinea? I think it's one of these spaces not on the map or not colored on the map. This one is a new country, actually. Maybe before I give you wrong information, we can just look up. I think it's in the early 90s. Timor-Leste, otherwise known as East Timor. Oh, the capital is Dili. Del, I didn't know that Dili was the capital, so Del knew. And then Indonesia in 2002. When did it become a country? Does it tell us? Maybe we actually have to open it. 16th century, 1999, self-determination. Yeah. So it's one of the newer countries, first sovereign state in 21st century. Oh yeah, it's 2002, it wasn't even 1999. So very, very new country, right? Very new country. A friend of mine did some development work there. And so that was when I first learned of this country. But yeah, around the time that a lot of you guys were born. Okay, so there you have it, folks. How did you do on the East Asia or Southeast Asia quiz? Here are most of the answers. As you can see, Timor-Leste is not here. Brunei is not here. All the other ones are here. But you know, what's the point? Is because here's Laos. If you've never heard of Laos before, here it is. It's next to Vietnam. And spoiler alert. Well, actually, maybe I can show you this. I know we should do the test maybe immediately, but I just want to tie this into the book. This is a book about the Hmong people. So the Hmong people, where are they in the world? They don't have their own country. Many Hmong people are in China, 2.7 million. So that's a lot of Hmong people. Also over 1 million in Vietnam, many in Laos, many in the United States, many in Thailand. As you can see, these are all in Asia. United States are not. So why do you think there's so many Hmong people in the United States? Maybe you're thinking, well, there are lots of different kinds of people in the United States, and that's true, but there's a special relationship between the United States and the Hmong of northern Laos. So the United States had a special relationship with Vietnam, right? What happened in Vietnam in the 1960s and 70s that was important for America? There was a war there, exactly. So
Civil War.
yeah. So the northern part of Vietnam, southern part of Vietnam, there's a civil war. The Americans helped the South, the Chinese helped the North, and the Americans were looking for allies in Laos. And guess who helped them out? It was the Hmong. And so this is a bit of a spoiler alert. That is why there's so many Hmong refugees in the United States. So the Lee family fled from northern Laos, went to Thailand, and then came to the United States. So that's a little background on this book. So why don't we call it there? Any questions about our map quiz? So again, it's a great book. It's an important book. Read the book. Buy the book. But if you don't want to buy the book, read the PDF I gave you. You have no excuse now. So read the book. Let's go over the quiz real quick. I think I already have it open. Yes. Or sorry, the test. So just very quickly, I'll go through these and give you the answers. And if you have any questions, obviously you can ask now, or we can go over them over email or set up an appointment or whatever. So this one, I tried to start things off pretty easy. You know, this is material that you wrote a forum post about. And so I hoped that this would be familiar for a lot of you. Some people wrote, well, I guess first of all, not everybody knew Senzaki. Some people wrote that he was in California when he wrote this, which of course he was remembering California, but he was in an internment camp, right? He was in Wyoming. Anything like that would have been full points. The sunrise, I was also very lenient about. It could be enlightenment. That was probably the best one. It could be Buddha nature. It could be freedom. It could be liberation. All of that's good. It had to be something spiritual. If you just said beautiful, that's not going to work. But anything that was sort of spiritual, I took as full points. This was Robert Wright's book, Why Buddhism is True. This one was a little bit hard. Not everybody got this. A lot of people knew it was Robert Wright, but couldn't exactly explain why feelings are illusory. And his whole thing is it's evolution, right? It's evolution. We have our caveman brains that train us to want the powdered sugar donuts. Remember the powdered sugar donuts we talked about in class, right? So if you wrote anything like that, you got full points. A lot of people missed points here, which is fine. It was a hard question. But yeah, it's basically we get trapped in the what he called the hedonic treadmill, where we look for pleasure, we don't quite get it, then we look for it some more, and then we don't get it some more, and we just kind of get trapped in the cycle. And he says that happens because of our caveman brains, because of evolution. What can we do to weaken its grip is meditation, right? So why does meditation help weaken its grip? Because we can not associate with these feelings, right? The feelings show up, but because they're fake, we can see them as fake, and then we don't have to chase after them. Most of you got that one. So that was that one. Thirst, craving. Who said this quotation? Well, I tell you, it's the Four Noble Truths. So most of you got this. It's the Buddha. Some of you wrote Kyon. If you wrote Kyon, that's also fine. This part, a lot of people missed, and maybe I'm mean for doing this, but I think it's something a lot of people assume about Buddhism is that desire causes suffering, therefore all desires are bad, right? And that's what I'm asking you. Do all desires give rise to suffering? And the answer to this is no. Not all desires lead to suffering. There are wholesome desires, right? And that was on the review sheet. What are some examples of wholesome desires? You guys have wholesome desires? Take the exam and just try to forget about it. Doing well on an exam. The path, yeah, trying to achieve enlightenment, trying to be a good person, trying to be a good friend, trying to be a good son, trying to be a good neighbor, trying to be a good daughter, family member, sister, brother, parents, child, whatever, anything. Just being a good person, right? These are all very wholesome desires. I would argue this is sort of, maybe it's a Catholic thing, and I shouldn't be torturing you guys, but I want you to remember, it is okay to want stuff, right? If you feel guilty every time you want stuff, you're going to have a hard life. It's okay to want stuff, right? That I want you to take that away from this class. This one was also, I tricked you a little bit. I wasn't trying to, but it's about action, right? Action. What is a Buddhist idea of action? Is karma. Karma literally means action. What does it mean to sow and reap? This was interesting. Sow means to plant, reap means to collect. If you wrote something like that, then you got full points. Some people really were twisting on this one. It's funny. I mean, it's very easy to look up, right? I guess if you look it up, you find out it means pig and you're confused by that. And so then you don't know what to do. Is reap, is that confusing if you look that up? No, this means to gather a crop, right? It's very clearly, sow means to plant, reap means to collect. Why does this matter in Buddhism, or how does this affect how do your actions affect one's destiny? This was interesting too. People wanted to do sort of a Santa Claus thing where it's like, if you're a good boy or girl, you get rewarded. Again, that's not what this is about. This is about within the very action itself, there are the seeds. It is a seed, right? The seeds of its results. By doing good stuff, you will be more likely to do good stuff. You won't get some prize out of the heavens or something like that. Again, it's sort of a washed down Christianity thing, I think, that most people think about when they think of karma. But that's not what's going on here, right? Is if you think good things, you'll be more likely to continue to think about those good things. If you do bad things, you'll be more likely to do those bad things, and you will create your own destiny as a result. A very clear example of this is addiction, right? When somebody does, seeks out these cravings, these negative desires, and gets kind of trapped by them. Okay, let's keep going on. This one was a little bit harder. McMindfulness, most people could get that. A lot of people didn't know what commodification means. It's unfortunate. It's to turn something into a commodity. Then you have to know what a commodity is, but it's turning mindfulness into a commodity, right? It's buying and selling mindfulness. It's turning it into some object that has no moral value to it. And so what happens when we take these ethical commitments away? Then meditation is no longer used in order to achieve enlightenment or to do good stuff in the world. Then it's being used to buy and sell stuff, right? You can become a better sniper. You can become a better CEO. It becomes something that can be bought and sold. The KFC thing, some of you guys brought that up. That was a good example too. What is this philosophy? Well, it's a midway philosophy, right? It's the middle way philosophy. So most of you guys got that. Why do phenomena not exist as they appear to exist? That's a little bit harder. The best answers had to do with impermanence, right? So things appear to be permanent. I appear to be permanent. My beloved computer appears to be permanent, but we all, as we've discussed, the second law of thermodynamics is entropy. Things move towards state of disorder. The fact of the matter is things don't exist that way, right? Things are not permanent. Other examples could be just talk about emptiness, the lack of inherent existence. That'd be a good answer too. Why does this matter? Is because if we hold on to things and think they're going to exist forever, we are going to be unpleasantly surprised one day, right? We are not living in accordance with the way things really exist, and therefore we will get sad when they eventually die. When working together with immigrants, oh yeah, so this is Senzaki. What is Buddha Dharma? It's the Buddhist teachings. Why is the speaker so kind to people? You could say a lot of things. The missionary approach is fine. You could say he's a bodhisattva. Buddhist emphasis on compassion, all of that was fine. This one is the Buddha, right? So again, he's talking about impermanence. Decay is inherent in all things. He's talking about impermanence. The second one, he's more talking about karma. So strive with clarity of mind is pay attention, right? Pay attention, because we don't always see things for how they are. We have to look very clearly. We have to try really hard to see things as they are. We have to pay attention to our actions and their results. And if we see that if I take this sort of action and it leads to this sort of result, then I should continue making those actions if we're getting what we want, right? So anything like that, you would have gotten full points. I was pretty lenient on that one. Okay, we have 4 minutes, plenty of time. Story of the Buddha and the Four Noble Truths. These actually come together pretty nicely. I was basically just testing, do you know these two things? If you knew the life story and you knew the Four Noble Truths, but weren't able to connect them, you probably got 18 out of 20. If you were able to connect them, that was the best. So in any way, right? So basically, like when he saw the four sights, he was seeing suffering. So those come together pretty nicely. When he achieved enlightenment, that was the end of suffering. So that's the cessation. That's the third one. Those come together nicely. The middle way as the Eightfold Path, the fourth of the Noble Truth, that one goes together nicely. Any sort of connection like that, you would have gotten full points. This one was also a pretty straightforward question. It was very similar to your forum post. It's basically connect Senzaki to some kind of Buddhism. And this time specifically the greater vehicle. The best answers talked about Buddha nature, Bodhisattva, skillful adaptation, or emptiness, right? You could say this idea like he is in a prison is actually kind of illusory, right? And so you can use emptiness to reimagine life in prison. So any of those would have been fine. Most people did pretty well on that one. And this one was hard. You didn't have to pick it. Some people did anyway. It's basically, what is Wright's argument? That whole thing about evolutionary psychology. We need to meditate in order to overcome our caveman brains. Purser's thing is more like a social commentary. We're suffering because society is bad, right? Because of capitalism and neoliberalism and all that sort of stuff. And then how do we reconcile these two views? A lot of people brought up Bhikkhu Bodhi as saying, we should meditate in order to prevent ourselves from becoming burnt out, which I think is good advice. If you're stressed out, do some meditation. Maybe it'll help. But don't stop there, right? There's a big world out there that needs your help. Be aware of other people's suffering, right? And try to remain engaged with the world. So something like that, you would have got full points. Like I said, this one was harder, so I tried to be, again, pretty lenient. I was, again, very lenient for all of them, to be honest. So that's everything. We still got a couple minutes. Does anybody have any questions about all these? Okay, well, let's call it a day then. Again, if there are things about your exam you don't understand, you lost